Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. Happy Tuesday morning to you. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. This is what I call my morning musings. And by the way, I really appreciate the feedback on this series so far as we are examining the books of Thessalonians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, which of course were Paul's epistles. As he had gone there, he had established the church, he had gone back to Athens, and what have you. He was so deeply troubled by what he was hearing about what was taking place in the churches there, and so he sent his emissaries back to Thessalonica, there to reestablish them, as it were, to comfort them by means of these epistles. And so as we look at 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, we have to keep in mind that these are absolutely what are known as occasional letters. A specific circumstance had arisen in those churches. Paul is addressing those first century events, first century concerns. Now, I want you to notice, and what we've done so far is we are going to be focusing on 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, eventually, all right? Not long. And our focus so far has been to examine Paul's discussion of eschatology prior to 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 in order to see if the context leads us up to chapter 4 and that chapter 4 is therefore just a continuation. And the significance of that is when we see that all of Paul's discussion of eschatology leading up to chapter 4 deals with the impending judgment of Jerusalem in the Old Covenant world that occurred in AD 70, then that gives us insight into 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. Well, we likewise want to take a look at the eschatology of 2nd Thessalonians, because almost immediately, evidently, after writing the first epistle, Paul turns around and writes the second. Now, remember, the first epistle is written in the context of persecution. They had received the gospel in much affliction. 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 10. Paul wrote to them not to be shaken in their minds because of the suffering that they were enduring, because Paul, when he was with them in person, had told them they were going to suffer persecution. So the context of 1 Thessalonians is persecution of the Christians. By whom? By the Jews in Thessalonica. This is confirmed by Acts chapter 17. Well, we come then to 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, and we'll spend a little bit of time here. But I want you to notice, look, this is one of the very favorite passages of preachers. Boy, it's dramatic. It's graphic. It's an altar call passage. Trouble of it is, in order to do that, we have to rip it out of its original context. Normally, people start verse 7 and say, "To you who are troubled, rest with us when the Lord Jesus is revealed from heaven," on and on. But the context starts earlier. The context starts with verse 4. And the context, I'm going to begin reading with verse 3, actually. "We are bound to thank God always," 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 3. "We are bound to thank God always for you, brethren, as it is fitting, because your faith grows exceedingly, and the love of every one of you all abounds toward each other, so that we ourselves boast of you among the churches of God for your patience and your faith in all of your persecutions and tribulations that you endure." Now I'm going to stop right there for time considerations. Let me go back over this very carefully. The context of 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 is the same context of 1 Thessalonians. It is persecution. It is persecution that was being perpetrated at the hands of the Jews. Remember, let me reiterate this. You turned from idols to serve the living God. You received the gospel in truth amidst much afflictions. The Greek word thalipsis, that's the same word he uses here. Thalipsis is pressure. It is the pressure in Thessalonians of persecution. And 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, 15 and following shows us emphatically that it was persecution on the part of the Jews that was being brought to bear on them. Now, remember, Jesus told his apostles and disciples, they will deliver you. We must observe audience relevance. They will deliver you up to kings, to governors, and to Sanhedrins. Mark chapter 13, 9 and following. This is very clearly Jewish persecution. It is not broad, generic persecution by some unknown entity. This is Jewish persecution. It is precisely what we find in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. As we go back to Acts chapter 17, the Jews stirred up the Thessalonians, causing persecution. So when Paul writes in 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 and says that he thanked God for their patience and faith in all of your persecutions, thalipsis and tribulations, the persecution there is actually pasco, and tribulations that you are enduring. And notice that he says, it is a righteous thing, verse 6, with God to repay with tribulation those who are troubling you. Present participle. Are. Now catch the power of this. This was not the Romans. The Romans did not persecute the Christians until 64 and following. Paul is speaking of the persecution of the church at Thessalonica that was then ongoing in 50 to 51, possibly as late as 52 AD, and says that Christ was coming in judgment of those who were, right then, at that time, persecuting them. The coming of the Lord of 2 Thessalonians chapter 1. Let me reiterate, because you have to catch the power of this, would be in judgment of those, quote, who are troubling you. This is not a prediction of a far removed, far distant persecution of the church. It was a prediction by the inspired Apostle Paul of judgment on those who were at that very time, 2,000 years ago, persecuting the church at Thessalonica. That was no one but the Jews. That means that the coming of the Lord of 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 was a prediction of the judgment of AD 70. Wow. Hey, look, folks, I developed that and a whole lot more in my little book, In Flaming Fire. This is an in-depth exercise in hermeneutic and explanation of 2 Thessalonians chapter 1. Go to my website, eschatology.org, BibleProphecy.com, and order the book, In Flaming Fire. I tell you, I've had everyone from college professors to, shall we say, the man in the pew tell me this book has changed their life. Got to get yourself a copy of this. Hey, thanks for joining me. We've got a whole lot more on 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, and it'll blow your mind. We'll see you on the flip side.